The morning sunlight poured into my kitchen like a warm hug, the smell of coffee mixed with vanilla frosting as I packed a small lunch bag, smiling like a fool. Today was Andrew's birthday. My husband, my partner, my favorite person, as I like to call him. I'd planned everything: his favorite meal, a small cake, even a handwritten card. It felt good to do something sweet for him, to remind him that after all these years, I still cared. I wanted him to feel seen, appreciated, loved. My phone buzzed, and Sarah's voice burst through, half teasing, half excited. "So what's the grand plan, Mel? Balloons? A marching band?" I laughed, nearly dropping the frosting spatula. "Oh, please, I'm not that dramatic. Just a surprise lunch and his favorite cake. He always says no one celebrates him at work." Sarah snorted. "Just don't make him faint when you show up." I rolled my eyes, still smiling. Everything about that morning felt light, simple even. I had no idea what was waiting on the other side of that smile. Before leaving, I added the final touch, a little card that read, "To my favorite person, from your biggest fan." It was cheesy, I know, but it felt right. I took a step back, admiring my work like a kid before Christmas. Then I grabbed the cake, called a cab, and headed out. I remember watching my reflection in the window, the city flying by behind me. I looked happy, peaceful. It's almost funny how life can look perfect, seconds before it isn't. The cab ride felt longer than usual, maybe because my heart was racing with excitement. I imagined his face when he saw me, that crooked smile he used to give me when I surprised him back in our dating days. Back then, it took so little to make him happy. A note in his jacket pocket, dinner waiting when he came home late. Somewhere along the way, I guess I started chasing that version of him again. The one who used to look at me like I was his favorite part of the day. As the city rolled past, I couldn't help glancing at the cake box on my lap. The frosting had smudged a little on the side, and for some reason that made me smile even more. It wasn't perfect, but neither were we. I told myself that was okay. Real love never is. I pictured walking into his office, everyone clapping, maybe even a few jealous coworkers wishing someone cared for them like that. My chest felt warm just imagining it. For once, I wanted to make him feel special. When we finally pulled up to his office building, I took a deep breath. It looked so professional, tall glass doors, people in suits rushing in and out like clockwork. I hesitated for a second, straightened my hair, and reminded myself why I was there: to celebrate him. I paid the driver, thanked him, and stepped onto the sidewalk with the cake in my arms. The sun hit my face, and for that brief moment, I thought, this is what happiness feels like. If only I had known that inside those doors, that feeling was about to end. Inside the lobby, everything gleamed: marble floors, quiet hum of printers somewhere in the distance, and the faint smell of coffee and cologne. I walked toward the reception desk, clutching the cake like it was something sacred. People glanced my way, probably wondering who walks into an office on a Friday with balloons and a lunch bag. I didn't care. I felt proud. Proud to be his wife. Proud to celebrate him. Proud to still believe in small gestures. That belief, it used to mean everything to me. While waiting for the elevator, I checked the note again, just to make sure the ink hadn't smudged. To my favorite person, from your biggest fan. I whispered it under my breath, smiling like a teenager in love. There's something about surprises. They remind you of how much you still hope. Hope that someone will notice. Hope that love still matters. I felt that hope swelling in me, stronger than reason, stronger than time. That kind of faith is dangerous, I'd later learn. As the elevator doors opened, I stepped inside, my heart pounding with joy. The mirror reflected a woman who still believed her marriage was whole, that love could be mended with effort and frosting. I remember thinking, he'll be so happy when he sees me. And that thought, that tiny, innocent thought, was the last peaceful one I'd have for a very long time. The elevator doors slid open, and I stepped into a hallway that smelled faintly of toner and peppermint. My heels clicked against the polished floor, echoing louder than I expected. I held the cake steady and rehearsed what I'd say when I walked in. something playful, like, guess who couldn't wait till dinner? My heart fluttered at the thought. I felt like a girl again, sneaking into her boyfriend's workplace just to see him smile. It was silly, maybe, but it felt right. Then I reached the reception desk. The girl behind it, barely out of college by the look of her, had the kind of bright smile that made people trust her instantly. "Hi," I said cheerfully, setting the cake on the counter. "I'm here to surprise Andrew Miller. It's his birthday." She froze. The smile slipped from her face so quickly it was almost comical. I laughed softly, thinking she was confused. "You know Andrew Miller? From sales?" I added. Her eyes darted to mine, and something in them made my stomach tighten. "Andrew Miller?" she repeated, her voice suddenly hesitant. "You're his wife." I nodded, still smiling, though something in her tone made the air around us feel heavier. And then her face went pale. Really pale. Like she'd just realized she'd said something she shouldn't have. "Oh my God," she whispered. I thought you were the other woman." For a second, I thought I'd misheard her. The words just hung there, strange and heavy, like smoke that wouldn't clear. "The other woman?" I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. The girl, Lily, her name tag said, looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. "I'm so sorry," she stammered, eyes wide, hands trembling slightly. "I shouldn't have said anything." My fingers tightened around the cake box until the plastic creaked. I felt my smile freeze in place, like my face didn't belong to me anymore. "I'm sorry," Lily said again, her voice smaller now. She comes in sometimes during lunch. I thought..." She stopped herself, biting her lip. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt. I forced a breath, trying to sound normal, polite even. "She comes in? Who is she?" I asked, keeping my tone soft, almost friendly. Lily shook her head quickly. "I don't know her name. Blonde, pretty, always in a hurry. Please, don't tell him I told you." Her eyes pleaded with me, as if I were the one who might cause trouble. I nodded slowly, even smiled. That polite, practiced smile women learn when their world starts cracking in public. "Don't worry," I said quietly. "You didn't tell me anything." My throat burned as I picked up the cake, but I made sure my hands didn't shake. There were people around, watching. I couldn't fall apart here, not yet. I turned toward the elevator, my heart breaking in slow motion, step by step, as the girl behind the desk whispered something I couldn't quite catch. The elevator ride felt endless. I stood there clutching the cake, staring at my reflection in the mirrored walls. My face looked calm, almost peaceful, but my eyes told another story. They were wide, searching, as if trying to find the truth somewhere in that polished metal. The other woman. The words replayed in my head like a cruel echo. It didn't make sense. Andrew and I were fine, weren't we? He kissed me goodbye this morning. He said he loved me. Didn't he? The elevator chimed and I nearly dropped the cake. My hands were sweating, but I forced a deep breath. One step at a time, I told myself. I wasn't ready to believe anything yet. I just needed to see him, to look him in the eyes and know that this was some kind of mix-up. People make mistakes. Receptionists get confused, right? But even as I tried to reason with myself, something inside me, something small and sharp, whispered, "You already know the truth." When the doors opened again, I walked out with my head high, the same polite smile frozen on my lips. My body was moving, but my mind felt detached, like I was watching someone else play me in a movie I didn't remember agreeing to. The office buzzed with quiet chatter, laughter, phones ringing. Ordinary life continued, while mine had just shifted into something I couldn't name. I followed the hallway toward his office, not yet realizing that the next few steps would change everything I thought I knew about love. I stopped just before his office door. The glass walls made it impossible to hide anything. Everything inside was visible, every laugh, every gesture. And there she was. Blonde, elegant, the kind of woman who looked like she had never waited for anything in her life. She was sitting on the edge of his desk, legs crossed, leaning in too close, Andrew was smiling, that familiar, easy smile that used to be mine. He reached out, touched her arm, and the room tilted. My breath caught somewhere between my chest and throat. I didn't move. I couldn't. The cake felt heavier now, like it was filled with lead instead of frosting. They were laughing about something intimate. His body language said everything his lips never had to. My mind went silent, but my heart was screaming. I had imagined a lot of things in our marriage, arguments, disappointments, even cold distance, but not this. Never this. I thought surprises were supposed to make people happy. I set the cake down gently on a nearby table, almost reverently, like I was laying something to rest. My fingers trembled, but I still managed to pull out my phone. Just one photo. Then another. Proof. My hand was steady now. Colder. Surer. I didn't burst in, didn't shout, didn't ask for an explanation. I just watched him laugh, like I was invisible. Maybe I always had been. I don't know how long I stood there. Seconds, maybe minutes. Time didn't move the way it used to. Every sound felt exaggerated. The hum of the air conditioner, the faint tap of her nails on his desk, his low laugh that once belonged to me. I felt detached from my body, like I was watching someone else's life fall apart through a pane of glass. My brain whispered things like maybe it's innocent, maybe it's nothing, but my gut knew. It always had. For years, I'd brushed off the distance, the late nights, the vague explanations. Just work, he'd say, and I'd believe him, because believing hurt less than wondering. But standing there, watching him smile at her like that, all those little doubts connected like stars forming a constellation of betrayal. It wasn't new. It was just finally visible. My chest felt tight, not with anger, but with something heavier. The quiet realization that love had been bleeding out slowly, and I'd been too busy bandaging it to notice. I turned away before they could see me. My hands were steady now, almost eerily so. There's a kind of calm that comes after the truth hits, the kind that feels like standing in the eye of a storm. I didn't cry, not yet. I didn't even breathe deeply. I just walked toward the elevator, passing coworkers who smiled politely, unaware they were watching a woman carrying the ruins of her marriage in a cake box. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. Silence was my survival. The receptionist wouldn't look at me when I passed by. I caught the faintest tremor in her hands, the kind people get when they realize they've accidentally told the truth. I didn't blame her. In some twisted way, she'd done me a favor. I just nodded at her, almost kindly, and pushed through the doors into the cool afternoon air. The city looked different now, harsher, louder, like it knew what had just happened and didn't care. I walked without direction, the sound of traffic blending with the echo of my own heartbeat. When my phone buzzed later that night, his name lit up the screen. Andrew. I stared at it for a long time, watching it ring, imagining what lie he'd choose this time. Probably something about meetings or late clients or a coworker's birthday dinner. There was always a story, always a version that made him look like the man I wanted to believe in. But not tonight. Tonight, I let the call fade into silence, just like he'd let our marriage fade into habit. Lying in bed, I replayed everything. The cake, the laughter, her hand on his arm. The images looped behind my eyelids until they stopped hurting. That's when I realized pain has an expiration date. It eventually turns into something sharper, something useful. I didn't know what I'd do yet, but one thing was clear. I wouldn't let him see me break. Not now, not ever. The next evening, I sat on the couch with a cup of tea that had long gone cold. The house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that hums with questions. I didn't cry. I hadn't since that moment in the office. My emotions had settled into something steadier, sharper. The clock ticked toward 7, and right on cue, I heard the door unlock. His familiar whistle floated down the hallway, the same cheerful tune he always used when he wanted to sound harmless. "Hey, sweetheart," he called out, his voice easy, relaxed, the tone of a man who believed he still lived in the world I'd built for him. "You didn't answer my calls yesterday. Busy day? He kissed my cheek as if nothing had changed, as if my heart wasn't sitting right there on the coffee table, cold and untouched beside a wilted birthday ribbon. I looked at him, studying his face, every detail. The casual smile, the loosened tie, the faint scent of her perfume clinging to his shirt. "I stopped by your office yesterday," I said, my voice calm, even. "To surprise you." His hands froze mid-motion. For a heartbeat, his mask slipped. "Really?" he said too quickly. "You should have told me first. I was in meetings." I almost laughed at how predictable it sounded. Meetings. Of course, that old, tired lie. But instead of laughing, I just reached for my phone, the one holding the truth he hadn't realized I'd seen. I slid the phone across the coffee table. The screen lit up, and there it was, the photo. Andrew and the blonde woman, her hand on his arm, both laughing like the world had been kind to them. His face drained of color. "Melissa, wait," he started, his voice cracking. "It's not what you think." I almost admired his nerve. "Oh, I'm sure it's exactly what I think," I said softly. He blinked, struggling to find footing in a conversation that was already slipping through his hands. "She's just a coworker," he insisted, desperation creeping into his tone. "We were discussing a client, that's all." I tilted my head, pretending to consider it. "On your desk? During lunch breaks? Must be quite a client." His jaw tightened, and for a moment I saw something ugly flash behind his eyes. Not guilt, but fear. That's when I realized he wasn't sorry for what he'd done. He was sorry because I'd found out. Even then, I didn't raise my voice. "You know what's funny, Andrew?" I said, leaning back. "Even your receptionist thought I was the other woman." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Silence filled the room. Thick, suffocating, final. "I sold my weekends," I continued quietly, "to keep this house running, and you spent your lunch hours destroying it." My words were steady, but my heart, it was finally free of the illusion I'd carried for years. He tried to reach for my hand, but I pulled it back. "Melissa, please," he said, his voice trembling. "It was a mistake. It didn't mean anything." I looked at him, really looked, and for the first time, I saw him clearly. Not the man I had loved, but the man he had become. "You don't get to decide what means something," I replied. "You made choices, you built lies, you taught me exactly how much I mattered." His eyes filled with tears, but I felt nothing. No pity, no anger. Just a clean, quiet emptiness that felt almost peaceful. He sank onto the couch, head in his hands, whispering apologies that sounded rehearsed. "Don't throw everything away," he said. "We can fix this. We can start over." I stood up slowly, feeling the weight lift from my shoulders. "No, Andrew. You threw everything away. You just never noticed when it happened." He looked up, eyes wide, as if seeing a stranger. Maybe he finally was. I walked toward the window, the night pressing against the glass, city lights flickering like little truths, refusing to stay buried. "You know," I said softly, "I spent years trying to surprise you, with love, with effort, with faith. Turns out the biggest surprise was you." I turned off the lamp, leaving him in the dim light of his own regret. I didn't slam the door when I left. I didn't need to. Some endings don't echo, they just close. Quietly. Permanently. People think revenge is loud, shouting, broken plates, a dramatic exit. It's not. Real revenge is quiet. It's calculated. It walks into a room smiling. The next week, I ironed my blouse, fixed my hair, and walked into Andrew's office building like I owned the place. The same receptionist, Lily, glanced up startled, but I gave her a small nod. "I'm here to see Mr. Collins," I said. My tone was calm, polite. She didn't ask why. Maybe she already knew. Mr. Collins greeted me with professional warmth, clearly expecting a harmless chat about family or work-life balance. "Mrs. Miller," he said, gesturing to the chair. "What brings you here today?" I smiled, resting my bag on my lap. It's a personal matter, I began softly, one that affects your team's reputation. His posture changed immediately. I reached into my bag, pulled out my phone, and turned the screen toward him. The photo of Andrew and her glowed between us, silent evidence that spoke louder than any accusation ever could. Mr. Collins's face hardened. This could cost him his position, he said after a long pause. I met his gaze, steady, unwavering. He cost himself that, I replied. There was no malice in my voice, just truth. He nodded once, understanding. As I left his office, I passed the same hallway where I'd once carried a cake and a dream. This time I carried something far more powerful, peace disguised as vengeance. By Monday, the storm had already begun. I didn't need to call or ask. The silence from Andrew was enough. Then came the message. Placed on temporary leave. Don't know how this happened. I almost laughed. Of course he didn't. Men like Andrew never see the storm until they're standing in the rain. I poured myself a glass of wine and watched the evening news while the world he built on lies began to collapse quietly around him. There was no satisfaction in it, just symmetry. Balance, finally restored. A few days later, I heard through Sarah, who somehow always knew everything, that the blonde woman had resigned. Word is she left without saying goodbye, Sarah said over the phone. I just hummed. There was nothing to add. The universe had a way of tidying up after itself when you stopped interfering. I didn't need shouting or chaos. I just needed space. Space to breathe again. Space to start being me instead of his. That weekend, I went through our joint accounts and moved my half, and a little extra, into my own name. No guilt, no hesitation. I'd earned every cent of it through years of compromise, through dinners eaten cold and birthdays celebrated alone. I called a lawyer on Monday morning. When I hung up, I felt lighter than I had in years. It wasn't happiness yet, but it was something better. It was the beginning of freedom. When he came home that evening, the house was half empty. My clothes, my books, my favorite coffee mug, gone. Only the furniture remained, hollow reminders of what we used to be. I imagined his face as he looked around, calling my name, realizing too late that I was no longer part of his story. On the table sat a small envelope beside the last slice of the birthday cake I'd baked. Inside, just one note in my handwriting. You taught me how to surprise people. I just returned the favor. I didn't wait for his reaction, didn't need to. I was already miles away, watching the city lights blur through the car window. There was no crying, no music, no cinematic breakdown, just peace. A clean silence that felt like forgiveness, without the need to forgive. I thought about how love can rot quietly, like fruit left in the sun, and how sometimes you have to let it die before it poisons you too. That's what I'd done. I'd chosen myself, finally. As the car turned toward my new apartment, I caught my reflection in the window. I didn't see the woman who'd walked into his office with a cake and a dream. I saw someone new, someone stronger, steadier, untouched by his shadows. Revenge hadn't made me bitter. It had made me whole. Because sometimes, the sweetest justice isn't in watching them fall. It's in knowing they'll never rise again in the world you've already outgrown. 6 months later, I walked into a new office. My office. The morning sun streamed through tall windows, painting everything in gold. The air smelled like fresh paint and coffee, two of my favorite things. On the wall hung the logo of the company I'd helped build with an old colleague who believed in second chances. As I looked around, a quiet smile tugged at my lips. This was what starting over looked like. Not dramatic, not loud, just solid and real. For the first time in years, I felt completely at home. Sarah showed up that afternoon with flowers, bright yellow ones, the kind she knew I loved. She placed them on my desk and gave me that knowing grin only old friends can pull off. You've changed, Mel, she said. You look alive. I laughed, setting down my coffee. That's because I stopped celebrating someone who didn't deserve it, I told her. Now I celebrate me. She nodded, a spark of pride in her eyes. There was no pity between us anymore, just understanding. As the day went on, people dropped by to welcome me, to shake my hand, to talk about plans and projects. It wasn't just work, it was purpose. Every email, every decision, every breath in that space reminded me that I'd built something out of the ashes. I wasn't the woman who waited by the phone anymore. I was the woman who wrote her own next chapter. One signature, one choice, one sunrise at a time. That night, the apartment felt different. Light, open, mine. No ghost of arguments in the hallway, no silence waiting to swallow me whole. Just me, the soft hum of the city outside, and the faint scent of jasmine from the candle flickering on the counter. I poured myself a glass of wine and looked around at the small, imperfect space that now held my peace. It wasn't the biggest apartment, but every inch of it belonged to me. Every book on the shelf, every mug in the cupboard, every decision made without fear. I ordered takeout, the kind Andrew used to hate, spicy noodles that made my lips burn and my eyes water. It felt like rebellion in a paper box. I sat by the window, barefoot, watching the city glow below. Somewhere out there, he was probably sitting in the house we once shared, replaying everything that had gone wrong, wondering when exactly he lost me. The truth was, he hadn't lost me that day at the office. He'd lost me slowly. One excuse, one lie, one forgotten touch at a time. As the night deepened, I found myself smiling, not out of joy, but out of peace. Healing isn't loud, it's quiet, like the sound of breathing after a storm. I'd spent years giving pieces of myself away to keep someone else whole. Now I was done shrinking. I wasn't surviving anymore. I was living, unfiltered, unapologetic, and finally, unbroken. Before heading to bed, I opened the small bakery box sitting on the counter. Inside was a single cupcake, chocolate with vanilla frosting, just like the cake I once made for him. I placed it on a plate, struck a match, and lit a single candle. The tiny flame flickered, reflecting off the window, warm and fragile like hope itself. I smiled softly. This time, the celebration wasn't for him. It was for me, for the woman who had walked through fire and learned to dance in the ashes. I took a deep breath and whispered, "Happy birthday, Andrew. Hope your next surprise isn't as sweet." The words didn't sting. They floated out into the quiet night, carried away by the hum of the city and the steady rhythm of my own heartbeat. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the peace settle. It wasn't vengeance anymore. It was closure, a full stop at the end of a story that had finally run out of lies. When I blew out the candle, the room fell into gentle darkness. For a heartbeat, I just stood there, smiling, grounded, alive. I realized that I didn't need anyone to witness this moment for it to matter. The world didn't need to know how far I'd come. I knew. And as the last wisp of smoke curled upward, I whispered to myself the only words that truly mattered. I'm free.